Have you heard this?
No.
So like in the startup world, like success is sort of predicated as almost as if you're surfing. So you have the surf, which is like the tailwind of the market. So it's like the market.
Yeah.
So like by definition, if there's like not a good market, you could have the best surfboard and surfer, but like you're not going to surf. So you need that sort of belief to be in there. Data leakage is like probably more important now than ever. And I'd say that in the sense where historically, like let's just assume I'll call it 2022. Pre-2022, you had leakage that still assumed like employee information, maybe some level of their personal information. I'm probably of the belief of like, okay, data leakage still happens, but now it kind of requires someone who's less sophisticated to actually act on that data. And in this case, you kind of bad AI agents taking your leakage and then actually doing everything that a sophisticated attacker would do based off of prompts. One of the most important things to do is have probably more levels of security or sort of more tools, right, for data leakage that sort of have the permissioning in place. Because I just assume if it's in the hands of a bad AI agent, it could probably exponentially do more harm than a human would historically. So I think the wrong type of pivot is doing the thing that is like mimetic in nature. So the wrong pivot is we were a SaaS 2.0 company, and now there's all these new AI 1.0 or 2.0, whatever the nomenclature companies. We want to pivot into that because that's like the hot thing that everyone wants to talk about. That's what the investors will fund. And I think that's probably the wrong thing to do.
Welcome to Be Fearless podcast.
Thanks.
Yeah, such a pleasure to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Maybe I just can give a short background to our listeners about what you do, who you are, why you're here, and things like that. Zain actually is a principal at Rich Ventures, and he is working with a lot of founders at early stage startups. And before Rich, he was a senior associate at Perlin Venture Partners, and before that, Cloudflare. And also one of the fun things I found out that you also an author of Indiscreet Musings.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I'd love to learn more about this. But maybe we can just start off from your background. You started from political science to Cloudflare to venture capital. So how did it go along?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here. And so on the sort of first question, everything I'd say is like extremely nonlinear. I've grown up in my career, the more I believed in nonlinearity and how that actually is impeccable with startups and founders, but we'll come to that later. So I grew up in Utah. My dad, he owned, it's like the typical South Asian story. He immigrates from Pakistan and he comes to the US to study engineering, and then he does nothing with his engineering degree and he buys a franchise. And so he ends up buying this Chuck E. Cheese in Utah. And in retrospect, it's really smart because there's more kids per capita in Utah relative to other states. And it's seasonal. So kids will come in, families will come in and spend when it's cold outside. So I grew up in Utah through that. And, I was didn't take my academics very serious in high school, unfortunately. But so because of that, I decided to stay local at the University of Utah. And then, I think probably like a year into college, I kind of got serious, which is... much to my
right
parents'
time,
dismay. At some point, I'd have to get serious. I think it's better sooner than later. And so I did the natural thing, which was, in sort of my household, there was like a couple of defined paths. It's you go become an attorney, a doctor, or, something that is sort of worth the immigrant sacrifices, if you will. So I was going the political science route. And then senior year, I had 2 credits left. And I had done a bunch of law internships and clerkships and what have you. And I just quickly realized I don't want to go to law school. So I sat there about to graduate, having sort of a, quarter life crisis. Because I had all the time, I was taking a bunch of credits. I was just reading a lot. So I read some of these books on tech and venture and like everything else from there. And it was beautiful in the sense where I was dedicating my life to a fixed world, which is the law, and debating what is in the gray or not in the gray versus this world where you just create. And you create in terms of startups, and then you also create in terms of the financing of the risk. And that's when I first learned about what a venture capital is, what a founder is, what a startup is, what is software, what are bits. And then I did the quickest to simplest thing anyone could do. It was like, okay, what is a venture capitalist? Great. What is a venture capitalist in Utah? And through that, I cold emailed Pelion Ventures in Utah, where I was actually before, and they let me come on for an intern for 3 months. Yeah. So I quickly, in the span of 2 months before graduating, realized I did not want to go to law school, got an internship at Pelion for the summer, and then was realizing what I wanted to do next after that. Pelion was actually, was the CVC out of Novell. Novell was one of the most dominant tech companies, I think, coming in the 90s and 2000s. It was essentially Novell and Microsoft. Microsoft ended up winning, but they had this sort of deep technical expertise, which I sort of driven to. They were also first checks into Cloudflare. I think they were the first round. And so like I'd go into these, partner meetings, and there's this company called Cloudflare, and it's like, what's a DNS? What's layer 7? What's DDoS? What's a WAF? What's a CDN? It's like caching, generally speaking. Yeah. And like every time Cloudflare came up in the partners meeting, I just had so many questions, and I had no idea what it was, but it was so fascinating. And this was like Cloudflare around 200 employees, still super early. But then I saw like the awesome thing, which was it was such a complex product. And, if I compare that to like an SMB accounting software business, not being pejorative of it, that was very understandable, but Cloudflare wasn't. And every time I kept digging, I just had more questions. And so when the internship was done, I went up to one of the partners who works closely with Cloudflare at the time. I was like, hey, look, do you think they're hiring? And, through 14 interviews later. So,
oh, wow. 14.
Yeah. The Cloudflare interview process, again, mind you, I'm a entry-level college student, going through 14 interviews. And like, that's, I think on average, you go through 10. Yeah. After the 14th, finally had the final conversation with Matthew, and then joined Cloudflare right after college, and then moved out and was there for about 4 years. And so I think the like through line of the nonlinear path of political science into something like Cloudflare was, it just sort of followed my curiosity. And it turns out one of Cloudflare's core principles culturally is, if you are curious, you will do very well. And it's one of the rare best opportunities I ever had on a company that is extremely mission driven. And sort of in retrospect, the way I look at it is like, I got paid to learn a CS degree. Both in terms of what we were doing from a product point of view. Also, they were very Cloudflare as a culture. We would have engineers that help non-technical people learn how to code on Thursdays after, team meetings. So maybe also a lot of luck. Like, what's the chances that Pelion will let me come on and then like dictate and change the course of my career? So a lot of luck along the way, but very, very random. I would not recommend people to do political science and then get into tech. It's much harder.
I wonder whether it gave you a certain edge when you just entered Cloudflare and everything. Because if I think about someone, that has a linear path of getting into something like this, I wonder if later on it gives this opportunity to move later on to VC, right? Because you have to have this certain mentality to keep on shifting, being ready for unexpected changes. Do you think it gave you a certain edge?
I don't know if it gave me an edge, but it made me realize everything is learnable. And like I quickly realized like that first quarter I started at Cloudflare, I'm learning a lot. I'm also learning about like my first career job and like what it's like working in like a big company or a company. Yeah. But at the same time, I'd go home and I'd take the Harvard CS50 classes, completely free online. Anyone else could do it. And then I just sort of I think the thing it maybe gave me was like this level of self-confidence that everything is learnable. You just have to dedicate time to doing it. And I think that's also like the thing I'm most excited with also AI, and like even pre-AI and with the internet, everything is learnable, but now it's just much easier. So there's almost limited excuses to say you can't do anything. And I think in the Cloudflare case, it just made me realize there's quick correlation of inputs. So controlling what you're learning and how that affects your outputs. In this case, career progression or things you could do after. And maybe the edge sort of exists in the fact that one doesn't pigeonhole themselves into doing one thing or just being stuck doing that thing.
Yeah, I think it's a very good approach. And as you said, everything is learnable. And I don't think that any other sort of mindset would work in the world of VC, because that's the way you function. You have to constantly learn. And I'm just curious, how do you really apply these principles, or sort of how did it help you to discover some of the great opportunities out there, right? By applying this mindset.
I'm still applying it every day. I don't think I have, because venture is also interesting where you could have everything right, but still get it wrong. And have everything wrong and still get it right by definition.
That's how it works. Venture, that's how it works. You expect
Yeah.
things to fail.
Yeah, totally. And there's so much, I think, entropy, so randomness and luck. I think the one thing that I'm trying to be very deliberate about in my career, which is still young, but I have no basis to say like anything is right because I don't even know if I'm good at this, is the ability to relearn things. Because I think what happens is, you mentioned there's so much high failure rates.
Yeah.
So you can invest in like 7 security companies doing next gen WAF, all kind of doing the same thing, but then the 8th one works. And maybe there's this infallibility that we have to think that we know things won't work in venture. And like the data would suggest it wouldn't work, but you have to unlearn some of the things much quicker and faster. So I'm actually like, right now, I'm always questioning my assumptions of, okay, do I really think I should not dismiss this because I've seen 4 companies doing this exact same thing and it doesn't work? Where do I need to dig into more to sort of unlearn things? And I think that's like the biggest challenge, at least for me personally. And even if I do that, I could still get it wrong, which is what makes this really fun and hard.
That is fun. I don't think I've heard that approach before. You not only have to learn, but you also have to unlearn. Yeah, it's very interesting because a lot of people have someone join them based on their experience, right? But then sometimes it can actually pose a certain disadvantage just because you're not flexible enough to understand and the world in cybersecurity investment, right? How do you know what is right, what is wrong? And that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask is there are like, how do you really assess beyond the basics? What is the right company to go for? You know, there is founder, team, product. What's something that makes it stand out for you when you speak to?
Yeah. I think, oh man, it's great. So if I generalize this, it's like probably two concepts. One's this great analogy of like the surfer. Have you heard this?
No.
So like in the startup world, you like success is sort of predicated as almost as if you're surfing. So you have the surf, which is like the tailwind of the market. So it's like the market. It's like by definition, if there's like not a good market, you could have the best surfboard and surfer, but like you're not going to surf. So you need that sort of belief to be in there. And then you have the surfer and surfboard. So sometimes you might have a really good surfboard, which is the product, and an okay surfer, which is the founder. But if you have the surf and the surfboard, and you know the trend line's going that way, good enough. Or most of the time, if you have a really good surfer, which is the founder, on an okay surfboard, which is the product, but you have a massive wave, that within itself will figure itself out. So there's some working force function of those 3 things. And then the other thing is, if you believe in like so much entropy in venture, I tend to want to break that down into probabilities. And so, okay, I ask myself simply when I'm assessing teams, like what is the probability that in the year the founder can hit $1 million or so in ARR? Is that 50, 60, 70, or 80? What is the probability that they can hire? What are the heuristics of that they can hire? Is that 60, 70, 80? And so then if you start to break down the probabilities of things that they need to from 0 to 1, 1 to 5, or 5 to 10 on whatever the nomenclature is, and then you can get like a weighted probabilities over time, which will change because then you have an assumption of the probability. And then 6 months from now, the founder can execute and then it's like, oh, like that's gone up like 80%. So you break down all these probabilities. And then if the trend line starts to increase, it goes from like 60 to 70 to 80. Then I think that's a really good way to sort of suss out like, okay, this is the right surfboard, the surfer, and like the other analogy. But I think thinking probabilities is probably the most important thing. You only also probably get that realistically after the investment because then you get to see how fast people move and all these other things. Ahead of the investment, I think it's a leap of faith of just making sure you feel comfortable on 2 of the 3. You definitely will need 2 of the 3. There are some founders that can wait long enough to have a surf artificially created. And those people are extremely rare. And I'm not smart enough to assess or know when I can see one of those. But it's definitely possible.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It made me like your surf analogy also made me think of dating analogy. It's like, it's something that you only find out once you're already in a relationship, right? Like you might think, okay, this is the best person out there. And then later on you discover, I wonder how many times does it happen that you thought this is the best surfer, the best surfboard.
Yeah, no, it's hilarious. It's like, I think dating is like the best thing, the best default to know if you're in the best relationship is having spent a lot of time with a person. So you know the people. And I think there's a level of, knowing that you maybe don't want to trade for the founder you invested versus the one that just came out. I think it's this just empathetic belief in the person that will figure it out. And that takes time to get to know people. And that's why I hated like 2021 investing, which was like a week or two and you don't know these people and you're stuck in very bad marriages. Like by definition, it's very hard to get sort of divorced in this case from a VC and a founder. But I think now there's some normalization on, if you believe in the surf, so in this case, if I believe in a specific market, I will do as much time as I need to spend time with the surfers in ways that I think are more natural in getting to know them.
What do you expect for 2025, 2026 when it comes to investment, cybersecurity especially? Like, is this the good time for the waves to take off or?
Yeah, I wish I knew.
Or which is the space that you're more looking into right now that you think has a higher chance of growing, performing?
So I'll give some broad trends that I'm just observing and looking for data to support if my observations are right. I think there's the trend of structurally some level of renaissance back to what is US cyber. And so US-based cyber companies, not building in the name of US, but like I think having the resilience of that. And historically, if you look at like the top, publicly traded cyber companies, Palo, Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, it's still in that bucket of US cyber. Seems like there's been over-rotation in some other places. So I think that will kind of normalize. And so I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's good. I think in the case of also cyber, I'm looking at like these sort of antiquated industries where the status quo has been very limited and what AI can do to sort of enhance those. And so like one that comes to mind is like security awareness trading. Like historically it's just been completely antiquated. It hasn't actually reduced employee risk over time. To me, the great force calling here is like you can actually leverage AI to hyper-tune your training, hyper-tune your phishing simulations, create risk modules on employees that make a lot more sense. And, do structural things that really matter. Like voice phishing is a issue that a lot of people are going through right now. And yet there's no good solution to help train humans to actually discuss if like knowing you're calling a fake CEO or not. And you could automatically buck that trend with things like a safe word, right? Very simple things to sort of train. So I'm very interested in, I think, security culturally. And I think that osmosis goes into security awareness training as a market. I think the other thing too, which is on my mind is what does security look like in the world of agents? And I think it's too early to call it. And I know there's some companies sort of on the periphery. I think authentication is going to go through another revamp on agent authentication and validation, if you will. And so that's one area I'm looking at, which I think is very interesting. And like, call me also old fashioned. I also still think, like there's a lot of good things that you can do just by building a better DNS or like WAF. And a lot of people are like over rotating on like, we should build AI security or AI agents. So I'm like, well, also if you look at the trend line of like internet usage, it's pretty high. So what about another better DNS company or a better WAF company? And those markets are huge, but they're also huge providers in it. I still think I would not bet against the surf of the internet and what that looks like. So I look for, I'm looking at like next trend things that I think current security teams are buying, with security training being one, revamping old security products that are sort of more proactive to begin with. And I think, and I'm very bullish on what US cyber looks like.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And, everyone is using internet right now. It's inevitable. And I heard many people saying that browser is becoming the new endpoint.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about it? Right now, more and more people spend time there. How does investment world looks into this space today, and what are some of the predictions, expectations that they see from this space today?
Technology is like extremely important. I think it's also like one of the most ubiquitous, both consumer and like enterprise use cases. If you take a consumer using their internet desktop browser or even a mobile browser, or if you do that on a company device, like it's still one of the main ways people interact.
Yeah.
So I think that will always be like one of the force functions for it. There's also this other reality of what happens in this world of like agent-based browsers. And there are some companies building the agent-based browser. And I think that's going to require a different level of security that looks different, probably attached to some level of authentication. Yeah, I think it still exists. And I think if you look at the existing solutions too, it's just been very much structured on like, are you in the corporate network or not in the corporate network? I think by definition, the corporate network is changing post-COVID. I think browser is probably the best way to start with. The other thing I'm also very curious is like, okay, there's also another belief, and there's some data suggesting that people don't go to browsers anymore. People will go to Perplexity, OpenAI, and some of the foundation models that have consumer products. So then what does security look like in that case, right? Like, is there a way you can fit into Perplexity's UI, you know, as a security company and ensure that what you're protecting browser-based data leakage against, you're still doing that with the consumer foundation models?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing. Also, the thing I always think is interesting is like, if you want to build a good security company doing something in sort of browser-esque, just follow the ads. And so you look at where ad spend's going, and it's going to like more companies like Perplexity than it is going to like historically Google or some of these other companies. So that's a hypothesis. I have like no other initial data supporting that.
No, it's very interesting. And, you know, today we do see, I actually automatically open ChatGPT, Perplexity, just to find an answer, because I'm becoming so impatient with Google search to give me the best answer. So then another big topic, data leakage, right? Within enterprises, I think a lot of people don't pay that much attention whether they use corporate version or the private version, right? And then sometimes you just forget to switch context, right? And what does it mean for an enterprise that you're working for, right? It might lead to big data exfoliation. So do you see any particular trend in that area, whether it comes to investment development of this space?
Yeah, so I actually think data leakage is like probably more important now than ever. And I'd say that in a sense where historically, like let's just assume I'll call it 2022. Pre-2022, you had leakage that still assumed like employee information, maybe some level of their personal information. It still kind of require like a somewhat sophisticated level nefarious attacker to act on the data to do something. Yeah. And so again, I'm probably of the belief of like, okay, data leakage still happens, but now it kind of requires someone who's less sophisticated to actually act on that data. And in this case, you kind of bad AI agents taking your leakage and then actually doing everything that a sophisticated attacker would do based off of prompts. So to me, it seems like that's actually probably one of the most important things to do, is have probably more levels of security or sort of more tools, right, for data leakage that sort of have the permissioning in place. Because I just assume if it's in the hands of a bad AI agent, it could probably exponentially do more harm than a human would historically. And I think we're starting to see that, right? We're starting to see that with like these voice AI agents that are calling CIOs and or not even CIOs, CEOs, and duping folks. And so I don't know how that's going to play, but I think that's like one of the biggest things that we should all be concerned of. Yeah.
And it's just made me think of also extensions, browser extensions, right? One of a friends of mine, she doesn't like to pay for like any subscription. So
all right, good for her. How's that going for her?
That's a good. She got some data stolen just because she downloaded like a free version of ChatGPT. And I'm just curious.
Wait, she got data stolen from?
It was, she didn't put too much, but then like her password got leaked. I mean, it was for smaller app, but still.
Yeah.
It just was very interesting how fast people realize, or I shall better say, attackers realize that this is another threat vector that not many people thought of when it comes to extensions, because I use it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know how about you. My spelling is terrible, so I have to use Grammarly.
Yeah.
So I imagine just protection from that side is something that's gonna grow and develop.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's right. I think if you believe in the fact that people are going to use AI for productivity and whatever that form factor looks like, extensions in Grammarly in this case, or even directly with ChatGPT. Yeah, I think it's going to continue to happen. I also think like how much safer would you be incrementally if you just had a password manager in place, right? Like I don't know, LastPass, NordVPN, not investors in either, but like that is where I believe in. Like I use one of these password managers for everything. They're the most sophisticated passwords that are auto-generated that I will never remember. I just need to know one password, which is the master password for it. And I think that will reduce a lot of risk, but I still think that people will be using a lot of AI tools today. They're using it on the consumer front. And I think there's also a non-trivial chance that the tools will, it's almost like, it's like a social media account. Like there are people who have like multiple humans that have multiple social media accounts because they don't want to conflate their personal world with their work world. Yeah. And so what is interesting in this AI world, they will know us better in both of those contexts and can self-sabotage both of those contexts. Yes. Right? So there's this level of, I think, authentication or whatever the form factor might be. And I think that's probably, again, one of the biggest issues I see coming up just on the consumer lens of security.
Yeah, definitely. And all of us like to have, let's say, personal Gmail open right next to the corporate Gmail open. Yeah. And then it's so easy just to get targeted via personal and then get your corporate compromised. And really wish, there are better measures in place to filter this kind of stuff, because as an enterprise, you control corporate environment. You can't control personal environment. So yeah, how do you stay protected but also don't go against people's privacy? That is a big question.
That is tough. And this is like the optimistic view of me is how do you have people become more security conscious, right? Like what percentage of, the US population should just be using a VPN for a consumer VPN when they're at a local Starbucks or something? Like there should be a high percentage, but consumers don't care about security. And that's, I think, that's one of the challenges I think the industry will face. And I think we're getting better at it. And I think that's my optimistic take. Because I can be very pessimistic about like, it's never going to change.
Yeah. Okay. Moving to more optimistic topics, right? When you see whenever a company is looking for that product market fit, okay, that's probably not an optimistic question, but what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see companies make when it comes to identifying, okay, this is going to work versus this isn't going to work?
Okay. I have a couple of thoughts on this. I think PMF is like such a long arc. Either sometimes you have it in the box, sometimes it takes a while. Independent of the metrics, it's one of those things when you know it when you see it. So I think the path to get there is like very different. I think in this like AI world post 24, 25, you have your obvious cases of Cursor. And in the case of Cursor, independent of the revenue, the fact that's sort of become a verb, there's a level of like PMF to that. My general sort of view of like, okay, what I think is fake PMF is companies. So I have two thoughts: fake PMF, and then when people should be honest if they don't have PMF. So in fake PMF, I think it's when people don't know their market well enough, where they've artificially inflated some level of numbers that don't sustain it. So I'll give you an example. You're building a S&P accounting business. And you really should be product led by your ACVs, your number of customers. But what you do early on is you just overlay sales very early. So on paper, it looks decently good. You get to $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million. So not like by definition PMF, but like, okay, the trend line to it is there.
Yeah.
But the problem is the trend then happens on year 2 or year 3, and you realize you built an enterprise sales motion for a product-led growth company. So you've disguised PMF to a degree. So I think there's this level of understanding not only the product, but also what the right level of distribution is for the market and where you want to go, and thinking through those in tranches. So I think that's like one error I see all the time. Then there's the other, the reality I face these days now. It's like every AI company has broken any SaaS metric. It's like 1 to 5, and historically, like you want a 3, 3, 3. Yeah. And you just don't know when the music's going to stop, or you don't know how real it is. And that's challenging. I think that's my biggest apprehension right now in investing, is I'm not smart enough to know when the music does stop or if it will stop. But by definition, they all have PMF, right? Because the number of users signing up is all there.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to actually like figure out the churn over a year. So, and I think the last thing is, one of the biggest fallacies I see with founders trying to figure out PMF is slogging to it. So, they have a hypothesis. So like in a year, we're going to have X customers, and then a year shows up, they have no customers, and they, have one large customer. Yeah. And by definition, then maybe that's not PMF, but they have this hypothesis that they're so stuck on. So you call this the slog. In that case, I would just tell founders, be very honest about what your product is and who you're selling to, and then how many of those exist, and can you do that in a early stage startup? And if that number or if something's off in the variables, the worst place to be is in the slog. Then just pivot, right? And just pivot and just pivot. And the thing I love about all these success stories in the valley of like all these startups is like all of them just came out of some level of like a J curve. Yeah. And it wasn't until like their 5th pivot then they became this massive like name. But the sort of ethos of that is like, at least the founders were very deliberate about deducing what didn't work. Yeah. And they were very ruthless about making sure everyone changed in it. Yeah. Both the company, the culture, everything. They lose people along the way, but that's the best thing for the company. And so I think people just need to be honest about understanding the distribution models for the market they're going after. And then also be very honest, like what the market is and what needs to change from a product point of view to have PMF. Yeah. And outside that, PMF is like such a very lucid thing. And I may be of the belief, like you don't have true PMF until you're at some level of scale. And it's one of those things when you see it, you know it, Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just like all these 3 points that you mentioned. Like if I could summarize it into one word, I would think of transparency.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just all about how confident you feel and how much you can push your ego from controlling the direction of where your company takes you. I wonder how many of the pivots that you saw that you're personally working with, because I think in this case, you're mostly relying on Surfer being right? That's another question I wanted to ask you, right? There is Surfboard, there is Surfer, there is Wind. Would you think that the choice of the right Surfer is more important than the other two or not?
Yeah, I think it's all Surfer. And maybe going back to the analogy of like pivoting, some surfers know which surfs to sit out because it looks good at the beginning and then like it's actually a small wave. I don't surf, so I think this is the right analogy. And then they have enough patience to know when they should gather all their energy to go time the right surf. But that comes over time. That comes on the instincts of the surfer. And then you have some surfers too, or founders in this case. They go out, they think they have the right wave. Then they realize it wasn't the right wave. And then guess what they do? They pivot. They go back to waiting for the wave. Yeah. And then they go back in, same thing. They pivot and then they go back again. And I think it's that trait of resilience and some level of like intuition. And founders need to, I think with that intuition, the founders that probably trust their intuition more are probably better well off than taking what market feedback or what their investors are sort of saying. They know their business. more intuitively than any of the investors would that, check in like once a quarter, essentially. So I don't know if that answered your question, but like, I think that ties into it. Okay.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of this sort of founders stopping from pivoting is probably to some extent because they try to impress investors, right? It's like, I got everything right. It's right. Like, I'm going to push it until like we are an absolute like bad place. Do you see, as an investor yourself, do you see like what is the right middle ground when someone tells you they pivoted versus them not pivoting at all, right? Do you see it as a red flag, green flag, or I'm just thinking if a founder comes up to you, I'm sure someone who wants to pitch to you is going to listen to this podcast and is like, I know how to speak to Zain now.
I know. So I think the wrong type of pivot is doing the thing that is like mimetic in nature. So the wrong pivot is we were a SaaS 2.0 company and now there's all these new, I don't know, AI 1.0 or 2.0, whatever the nomenclature companies. We want to pivot into that because that's like the hot thing that everyone wants to talk about. That's what the investors will fund. And I think that's probably the wrong thing to do. I also want to have like the acknowledgement that probably being a founder is super lonely because even if you have these thoughts, like think about it, it's like you had this firm belief and vision that you're going to go raise on this. You have these investors, friends and family, everyone in your social networks thinking that like you're going to go do this. And then all of a sudden you realize you don't want to go do that and it's not good for the company and now you have to pivot for that. It's a really lonely thing to do. So I actually like applaud that if you think about that from a sort of social hierarchy. But if the intent on the pivot is the right thing, which is we have tried everything to test out this in this market. We think it is bad for the business if we continue to do this, even if the short term looks good. And it's all sort of, driven by some data and levels of probability. And then we want to go pivot into this because actually we think this is more compelling and can solve more customer use cases versus it being like the hot thing or like investors will back us because we're that. That's probably the right thing, in my opinion. And I'm very cautious. I think also just like broader topic, being founder and the founder psychology is extremely lonely and hard and difficult. So how do you create space for these people to leave those identities, which are they're so attached to, but do what's actually right? And I think that just requires a lot of space and a lot of trust, right? I think if I've had like one call where it's like, hey, we're going to pivot. It's like, great, no questions. What can I do to help? I mean, at that point, you kind of know you probably need to pivot, right? If you're already an investor and it's not like clear PMF. But building that support to the pivot is, I think, really good.
So let's say a founder wants to approach you, right? Is there a right way to come up to you, talk to you, or things like that? I'm sure there are so many founders in the area that want to come to you.
Definitely not. I'll be very lucky if anyone comes to me. I know there's some investors that are like, make sure you get a warm contact. I'm just like, well, just reach out because there's some interest that there's some overlap and we can, work together. It's also funny. There's like, there's so much talk about like founders reaching out to VCs. There's not much talk about VCs reaching out to founders. Like ventures historically just gotten more commoditized. Like the end number of investors is like increased over like 10x. And all they're doing is reaching out to founders. So I always laugh when like how do like the founders reach out to these VCs? I'm like, there's like 100 associates reaching out to every founder these days.
That's true.
And why should we feel so entitled when they reach out to us, type of thing. And I think that's like the right level ground for founders. I think the only thing I'd say is like on the venture outreach, just I think be very honest if your business should be venture backable. And majority of businesses shouldn't be in terms of like what the outcome should be for founders. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm call, text. I'm sure my phone numbers. I have data leakage all over the internet, so just call whatever. Super open to it.
Yeah, just trying to find you somewhere on Instagram, send you DM.
Yeah, that one would be kind of weird. I'm like, yeah, that would be or Facebook. Or Meta. I don't use Meta these days. Like that's like
Do
weird.
people still use Facebook?
No, but that would be weird, right? If that would be like, yeah, this is weird signal because I don't use this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I use Facebook Marketplace occasionally, so.
Mm-hmm. No, it's yeah. I guess it's all about. I like how you said it's not only founders reaching out to investors, it's also investors reaching out to founders. And yeah, there are a few times that a lot of VCs send me a message. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. No, venture folks are like glorified SDRs, but the product is a commodity.
Yeah. So RSA is coming up.
Yes.
What are your expectations around the event, and what is the next best thing? Because I never been to RSA. So
you haven't?
I haven't.
Is it first?
It's going to be my first ever RSA. So
right. Well, you gotta let me know what are you looking forward to on your first one?
Well, we're gonna have our booth. We're gonna have lots of events, lots of podcasts.
Nice.
So I'm excited to those. Meeting lots of heads of security.
Nice.
Talking to them, bringing them to a podcast.
Nice.
But what are you excited about?
I see what you did. You deflected. I'm really excited to see what the world of AI SOC and AI security looks like. It's like a macro trend of 23 to 24, and it's like 2 and 3.5 years later. And so what is like the trend line of like these tools actually being adopted? And I think the other thing, so that like that's the bucket on vendors, and then talking to buyers like CIOs, CISOs, what is their version of AI DIY internally? So like, what are they building in-house with a security lens to it? And I don't know what that is, but that's what I'm like very interested in. I think it's also the right time to ask because most enterprises are actually, its trend line is there on like now using enterprise or AI in the enterprise. So like I'm very curious of like what is the DIY version of what CISOs are doing with AI tooling? Like what are they doing with like a Llama or like a Claude in-house and some of these models? And that's what I'm interested in, I think. And then, there's some other industries like non-human identities and things like that. Interesting to see how those are sort of panning out and some of these other sort of bigger trends that happened in the last year or two.
Yeah. No, it's exciting. I'm looking forward to all the talks and everything to see. I forgot to ask you about your blog. How did it start? I think in this blog you mentioned that investors' unique vantage point is to see multiple patterns across all stages of company. So yeah, what are...
Yeah. I don't know. I officially jumped to venture in 2020. I think I had the blog out in 21. And it's so funny. My first blog was on the future of cybersecurity, which was zero trust. And that feels like decades ago, but like this was, right after COVID. And so SASE, CASBs, DLPs were sort of back in flavor and all these other things.
Yeah.
And I think that was right. Like, I still think that's where in IDPs, like, I think that's like where it's going. Honestly, for me, it was just like, man, I feel like investing is such a privileged position because you're learning so much at a high level, not a depth level. And you don't know what's right or wrong. And I think one of the biggest things, like as a natural investor, one can do is you just write down your thoughts. And I wrote that down, and then I started just like sharing them out occasionally, both on investing and then both on trends that I was looking at. And if anything, they're just like thoughts of how I was thinking at the time. And it's really hard for me. I haven't figured it out, which is how do I know if I'm getting better as an investor, right? Because statistically speaking, the majority of the companies that we invest in like might not be like these huge, tremendous outcomes. Yeah. If I'm lucky, I maybe get one every 10 years or more than like, who knows? But the thing that like that writing down process has for me, it allows me to see myself a year before and then see how much I might have grown from my thinking in looking at specific markets, trends, observations on private market investing bubbles. And like, it's one of the things that all the great non-venture investors do. I mean, some do, but like also like, you know, the investors like Howard Marks, right? Or like Drunken Miller and some like the folks that actually, you know, do bond trades or equities. It's always just having the journal. Like the journal is the best way to know that you are constantly growing and maybe getting better. And so I started off with that. And then also I was just having enough interesting conversations in security. So I was like, oh, I think this would be helpful to lots of people. And we try to do it from the point of view where it's I'm talking to more buyers of how they think about things. And so that's helpful for me in terms of if I invest in company, how does a vendor sort of best approach that versus like a traditional VC market map. Yeah. It's all kind of moving.
Yeah, that's true. It's I'm sure that whoever reads it, you know, can always learn and unlearn things.
Totally.
Things that they're stuck with.
Totally. Like I'm sure I'm going to look back at like 2 posts or more than 2 and be like, oh man, I was so wrong about this. Yeah, exactly. That wasn't me. This is AI.
Yeah. No, I think just creating and replicating this kind of communities out there in an online world, I think right now is super important. And one of the reasons why we do podcast is also to give voice to heads of security as not just, you know, have this closed door conversations, because, you know, sharing out there, putting something out there is also a lot about educating not only people that are slightly junior, but also on the same level as you, and sharing, talking about certain trends really teaches about the space and everything.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And there are the people that will just want to learn for learning's sake. That always benefit, I think, from people who are actually in the shoes like you guys.
Yeah. How, what advice would you give to cybersecurity founders who try to balance innovation with more of a conservative nature of enterprise selling?
It's a good question. I'm a big fan of the concept of consilience, which is like you learn from different fields. And I think the advice I would tell cyber specific founders, especially with like how much should you spend on product versus go to market. Yeah. I think if you probably pulled like 100 other cyber founders and asked them, you'd probably get 80 to 90% overlap on what they say. I would just say, go talk to other people doing something different, but kind of the same. Can you go talk to a vertical SaaS company selling, you know, to construction software companies and learn a thing or two how they do it? Yeah. Can you go talk to a, surveying large enterprise and how they do it? Or can you go talk to like a company like, Snowflake, whose product is inherently just grows over time with more data usage? Yeah. And I would just say like, go outside of that and go learn from those. And I think typically you'll find some unconventional things that you can do that actually probably be more helpful. Because I think the issue I see with cyber go-to-market, it's always more of the same. And in some cases, it works out very well, where the product is phenomenally much better. Yeah. Right? Like I think Wiz comes to mind. Yeah. But in most cases, when you're in that 0 to 1, just you have the ability to try new things because nothing's said. And the best way to do that is you just kind of get out of your thought bubble and go talk to different folks doing different things and then incorporate what works best.
No, I agree. I personally also love to learn from all the places, cyber related, not cyber related. Yeah. Because, when you're in an emerging field, you have to learn somewhere outside of your typical scope. Otherwise, how do you stay creative in a way?
Yes.
So looking ahead 3-5 years ahead, what are some of the technologies you think gonna make it big?
Well, I'll tell you the one that I hope makes it big is humanoid robots, just because I don't want to do like laundry and dishes. Like that would be fantastic.
I'm excited about that one too.
Yeah, that would be great. You know how much time you would have. I am very bullish on the future of agents. And like in 5 years, I just wonder how much of what I do on a day-to-day can be automated. And I feel like I'm so behind on playing with the right level of AI tooling to just even sort of comprehend it. I use it almost daily. I'm really excited about personalized learning with AI. Both if you look outside of like just for like education and what that could look like, I think that's fantastic. Yeah. I'm bullish for entrepreneurship. Like, I think there's a world, if you zoom out of the valley or even venture and, startups, there's probably a non-zero chance that a lot of business owners can leverage AI more efficiently and become more entrepreneurial. And I'm bullish on that, both in terms of the economical impact to that and I think what that does for society. I'm obviously bullish on cybersecurity and always will continue to be. It's one of the most important things that continues to grow over time. Yeah. And it's one of those things where every sort of new macro technology shift, as good as it is, so I just probably had 4 reasons why I'm bullish on AI. Yeah. It also could be used negatively, and that's typically the case. You saw that, very much with social media. Yeah. And so I think cyber is always that best line of defense. Yeah. And I feel like we are all continuing to invest into that, both if you take defense tech and then just historical cybersecurity.
Yeah. No, I'm really looking to see how it's all gonna change in 5 years' time. And what kind of book or resource would you recommend to someone looking to either enter cyber or investing, or something that you think helped you be where you are today? Like, in a way, made you stop and think and unlearn or learn.
Yeah. The book that changed me a lot in terms of understanding luck is the Success Equation, which is like disentangling luck from skill in business, investing in sports, by Michael Mauboussin, which is a fantastic book. And he writes a lot about just investing and all these other anomalies. And then I think the founder path, the best book I've read was The Old Man and the Sea, which is an Ernest Hemingway book way back when. Yeah. And, I think the whole premise is like what this old man does to wrangle this once in a lifetime fish. And you sort of get this personal sense of how hard these things are, how dragging it could be, how lucky they could be, and all these other things and sacrifices along the way.
On this journey.
Yeah, exactly. Like something to that. I don't know. Oh, then my other favorite book is, How Will You Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen, is written with a former colleague from Cloudflare as well. I think that book, just every year I try to read it because it provides some level of realism, right? We're all humans at the end of the day. What we probably do professionally will not matter in the grand scheme of things. And then how do you retain integrity through it all? And then how inevitably at the end, right, do you want to measure your life? Yeah. And it's a very principled book that is also a very good reminder for me. Yeah.
No, I like especially that last point, because at the end of the day, it's, I think no matter how you act professionally or personally, at the end of the day, you are the same person.
Yeah, totally.
So whatever you put out there, it's still you.
Yeah.
So it's all about this integrity.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we like to do on our podcast is that a previous guest has a question for the next guest. So...
Do I know who the next guest is?
No, you don't.
Oh, no. Okay.
So it's just a very random question, but the previous guest asked you, how can we better communicate with anyone and everyone who wants to know about cybersecurity? Is it more about making it understandable to a specific issue, or having a more complex conversation around InfoSec as a discipline?
I don't know I should have known who your last guest was. It's a great question. I think complexity is like the dearth of things. I think making it more simple. I think providing transparency, simplicity, and then also a simple understanding of the adverse effects of if there are no cyber solutions in place. Like even like simple things like protecting from anonymous accounts online that are taking 40 to 50K away from grandmas that still use Facebook, right? There's a simple understanding of that. And I think that explanation will probably be much better. On the InfoSec side, again, simplicity is typically always the key. And I think the good thing about cyber is it's some level of binaryism, which I don't know if that's a word. It's good guys or bad guys. Yeah. And so make it very binary and simple of what is good, what is bad, and have that taught through the organization or through people.
Yeah, and I think especially when it comes to, there is so much information out there that I feel like those that are buyers practically are getting bombarded.
Yeah.
So it's all about how do you make this person's job easier.
Yes. Yes.
And just, being very crystal clear about the value. But I think also at the same time being personable, right?
Yeah, totally. And relatable.
Yeah. So what question would you like to ask our next guest?
Okay, give me a second. This is good. What should I ask? And I have no idea what they do profession-wise.
Yeah, you have no idea.
But some tied to cyber.
It's tied to cyber. They're likely to be head of security or invest in security. Actually, let me think who's the next guest. I think it might be someone you know.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Might be.
Great. It's great. Now you threw me off. Now, I think I'd probably say something around the lines of how do you embed, what are tactical ways to embed security guidelines, guardrails, what do you ever want to call it, into the culture of a company? And how do you culturally do it, not do it from a tooling perspective?
That's a good one. That's a very good question.
Okay, I'm going to have to tune in now and see how they answer it on the next one.
I don't know. Are you asking me to answer it? I don't know.
I'll tune in on the next one. So
that's been fun.
cool.
Thanks so much for coming down here, Zain.
Thank you for having me.